Welcome back, everybody. One stock we're keeping an eye on this morning is BioNTech. Check it out. It's up by 8% this morning. That's after the German biotech company came out with blowout quarterly numbers just a few minutes ago. That continues to be the trend that we've seen with companies associated with the vaccine, beating expectations, just like this one, again, up almost $15 for BioNTech this morning to close to $200 a share. According to the CDC, more than 43% of all adults are now fully vaccinated in the United States. This is prompting some conversations around easing masking policies for indoor gatherings as we head right into the summer months. Joining us right now to talk about that and more is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's the former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor. He also serves on the boards of both Pfizer and Illumina. And his latest op-ed that he talks about this morning gives reference to President Biden's support of breaking vaccine patents and what the United States could do instead. Scott, let's start with this op-ed that you have out today. It's you and another colleague who have been looking through these issues, and you're pretty concerned about what you think is bad policy. What happens? If we break patents, do you think we get to these vaccines sooner?
I co-wrote the piece right with Lou Boria, who is the chief scientific officer at FDA and worked on the National Security Council in the last administration. The concern here is that it's really not going to solve the problem. I mean, this was a political gesture. A lot of people have declared victory and moved on, but this doesn't solve the challenge of trying to get more vaccines into low and middle income countries. The reality is we're sitting on a lot of supply here in the United States. There's at least 100 million doses in the system that aren't being used and probably aren't going to be used that could be distributed to low income countries. And by the end of July, one estimate is that we'll have about 300 million doses in the United States. If we want to solve the immediate challenge, we should be getting more of those doses to those countries. If we want to solve the long-term challenge, we should be ramping up supply in the manufacturing sites that are currently operating. That's the most efficient way to get more supply around the world. We can work on tech transfers with some local producers in some of these countries, South Africa, India, Brazil, to do some of the fill finishing steps, and I think we should be doing that to try to build global capacities. But by next year, we're going to have a lot of vaccine. By the end of next year, just the three manufacturers that are currently producing probably are going to make 12 billion doses. So we're going to have a lot of vaccine to supply the world. It's not going to be a supply issue next year. It's really just a supply issue over the next 6 months. And the only way to solve that challenge is to share more of the doses that we're producing. Even if we do a full-on tech transfer, which the Biden plan doesn't contemplate, it contemplates other countries trying to reverse engineer our manufacturing processes, which take a long time. But even if we did a full-on tech transfer collaboration, it would take at least 6 months to 12 months. And I'll give you as an example, J&J is now working with Merck so that Merck can start making the J&J vaccine. They're anticipating that's going to take 6 months. So you have two established manufacturers that are up and running doing full-on tech transfer where they're cooperating, and that's going to take at least 6 months.
You know, we've talked about this again and again, and you've been pretty clear that this is what you think is the best way of doing things that whole time. If we've got extra doses and we're not sharing them, is that just another political expediency point? We just don't want to look like we're giving away vaccines if there's anybody here in the United States who still wants one?
Well, look, I think the administration wants to build up a stockpile heading into the fall in case we need to give part of the population boosters, but my premise is that we should trust our own supply chain. Right now, the manufacturers, Moderna, Pfizer, the company I'm on the board of, J&J, are ramping up supply. They have pretty stable supply. They haven't had major problems. I mean, Moderna and Pfizer have not had major problems in their manufacturing. So we should trust that supply chain and not be stockpiling so much when there's a crisis around the world. I think that, we can't be, on the one hand, giving away the intellectual property and not really protecting American companies overseas, and on the other hand, holding on to the finished goods, which the countries need right now. It seems somewhat cynical to me. So, at the very least, they should be doing both. I don't understand why they're holding on to vaccine supplies and giving away the intellectual property. But I think we should be erring on the side of giving away the vaccines first before we give away the IP.
Hey, Scott, I'm sure you saw when the Gates Foundation last week reversed course on this issue of IP and said that they would support a narrow waiver on this IP issue. There are others who say you can't have a narrow waiver because once the special sauce and the ingredients are delivered and people exposed to others outside of your company, you've sort of lost control of it. Who's right?
Look, I don't know what a narrow waiver is, and I'm not saying countries can't figure out how to reverse engineer these processes. China probably will figure that out. But even if you look at Pfizer, they manufacture this vaccine over about a half a dozen different sites because of the specialized equipment they need. The rate-limiting step there is getting the mixing machines that they custom make, which cost about $200 million each. They can't get enough of them. So these are hard processes to reverse engineer in any timely way. That said, I think part of the process potentially could be offshored. You could do some of the fill finishing of these vaccines in other manufacturing sites in other countries if you're working closely with them. So I think we do have to build local capacities in countries like South Africa, India, that do have vaccine manufacturers right now and could be scaled to do more of this work so that we could share on some of these tasks. But the idea that anyone's going to be able to reverse engineer these processes quickly to solve the immediate crisis, it's not going to happen. And in the long term, we're going to have ample supply. So this is really just a political gesture. People have long wanted to dismantle TRIPS. The Chinese and the Russians have especially, but a lot of groups have, a lot of third-party groups. They don't believe in international intellectual property protections. And so this was hailed as a victory. And my fear is a lot of the liberal groups that were supporting this have moved on. You haven't heard a lot of talk about the lack of global supply of vaccine this weekend because a lot of people have declared victory and moved on, but we have not solved the problem.
We haven't fixed the problem, right. Scott, let's talk about guidelines from the CDC, from the states, about what you can and should be doing if you're vaccinated, if you're not vaccinated, because I got to tell you, the lines are moving pretty quickly, and I don't even know what the official guidance is anymore. Where do we stand? People are kind of doing what they feel comfortable with on their own.
Well, I think that's what's going to happen. People need to judge their individual risk and take precautions based on their circumstance, whether they're vaccinated, whether they feel vulnerable, whether they're around vulnerable people, and that needs to be a key consideration. The bottom line is that we're fast approaching the metric when a lot of public health officials said we should start relaxing these public health measures in a wholesale fashion, which is around 10 cases per 100,000 people on a daily basis. A lot of states are well below that. About half the states are at 10 cases a day right now. The national average is around 13. About, maybe 5 to 10 states are around 5 to 7 cases a day per 100,000 people. We should be lifting the mask ordinances outside in a wholesale fashion. I think we should be lifting them in indoor settings as well in many states. So we've hit our own goal. So we've succeeded and met our own goal. We just are reluctant to relax the measures now.
The problem with that is businesses look to the CDC almost for a CYA. They're not going to relax the standards until they have an official telling them they can relax the standards because they think it opens them up to lawsuits if they relax before the government says it's okay to do so.
Right, and this is the problem because CDC is put in an uncomfortable position of having to opine on every facet of, American life right now. You look at their summer camp guidance, you have to stay within 6 feet of someone who's not in your bunk, wear a mask, 3 feet for someone who's in your bunk, sleep head to toe. You can't engage in activities that require shouting, so it basically outlaws kickball. I wouldn't be waiting for CDC to put out guidance on return to work in an office. I think the businesses need to come together, maybe work with some independent public health authorities, health commissioners in cities, and put out their own guidelines. I wrote about this last week in the Wall Street Journal because if they wait for CDC to put out guidance, I don't think they're going to like what they get. And CDC has not opined yet on office-based work. They've been reluctant to do that. So they've left the ground for businesses to step in and do that on their own. I think people who don't want to be encumbered by a restrictive CDC guidance at this point should be looking to try to develop their own guidelines through public-private partnerships with authoritative groups. Now's the time to do it.
Although most businesses don't even want to require vaccination, so why would they take a step out like that and go ahead and say they take on even more liability?
Yeah, if you're working with an authoritative group, I'm not sure that you're going to have a liability. You work with city health commissioners in some of the big cities. I think you can go that route. The vaccinations are a different issue. It's a question of imposing something on people that they feel is an invasion of their, personal choice.
Scott, thank you. Always appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
All right, coming up, Skybridge Capital's Anthony Scaramucci on whether government